Realty Evolution, and I'm honored to serve as the moderator this evening.
I'm Holman Lins. I'm with the Massachusetts Association of Realtors. I am the Government Affairs Manager. And ADUs have kind of been a very important topic that we focused on last session with the legislature. And it's something that we're kind of going around saying, trying to, educate as many people on as possible, because it is, a really key way that we can kind of work to address our housing shortage here in Massachusetts. So kind of kicking it off, Massachusetts takes the lead on accessory dwelling units. ADUs are permitted by right statewide in all single-family zoning districts. This was adopted last year as part of the Housing Bond Bill, which was a $5.2 billion bill that included a lot of policy items in addition to the funding. And it went into effect February 2nd, 2025, with the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities publishing their regulations online on January 30th. Kind of importantly, this new law supersedes any local ordinances that have been previously adopted on ADUs, something I was chatting with Ann about earlier. So it's something, towns like Beverly have already done ADUs, so this supersedes that, and they've had to kind of go and adjust regulations from there. And then importantly, there's no special or discretionary approval that can be required for ADUs. There's plenty of things that towns can regulate, and there's more things in the regulations, but this kind of streamlines the development process and homeowners and, renters within, the community. So just kind of quickly, MAR's involvement on this, because this is something that we put a lot of effort into. We really wanted to make sure that existing non-conforming ADUs were protected as part of these final regulations. We really wanted to strengthen and clarify the owner occupancy requirements, or lack thereof. Manufactured homes were something that were going to be excluded. So manufactured homes, in addition to modular homes, are options. We just really wanted to have property owners have as many options as possible as we go through this. Pre-existing non-conforming structures, like garages, we want to make sure that those can be something that can be converted. So we think that's something that's really going to be, a lot of residents and property owners are going to take advantage of. So, kind of at the high level, what is an ADU? In Massachusetts, an ADU is a small residence that shares a lot with a single-family house. The primary dwelling is usually larger. An ADU can be 900 square feet or half the principal dwelling size, whichever is smaller. And they include the whole principal dwelling, not just finished areas. And if you are building an ADU on, with a multifamily lot, it's like one to a triple decker, it takes into the square footage of the entire dwelling, not just a single apartment. They're self-contained, independent living spaces with their own kitchens, kitchenettes, bathrooms, sleeping areas, and they importantly have to have their own separate entrance, whether through a shared hall or corridor or through its own entrance to the outside. And then importantly, an ADU can be detached or detached. So in this picture up here, it could be, garage conversion, basement, attic, really it's going to be a new structure, or like I said, really, converted garages. Kind of going forward here, just kind of like I threw in like a few sample lot plans, just showing like the different ways that, you're going to have to kind of look at this and go, obviously it's easier for a larger lot, you have more space to do it. Towns can, kind of regulate setbacks and whatnot. So just wanted to throw that in there, just see there is some flexibility in this. Key things to know, there is no owner occupancy requirements for family work relationships for ADUs. A lot of towns, made it a requirement that either an owner lived in the principal dwelling or in the ADU, or if there was a family relationship or work requirement, that is no longer. And that goes to both the principal dwelling and the ADU. There doesn't have to be an owner occupancy in either of them. Municipalities can't require special approval or permit or discretionary zoning for the use of an ADU as long as it fits within the main regulations. Importantly, they can't impose additional minimum parking requirements. If the ADU is within half of a mile of a transit station, that includes bus, commuter rail, MBTA, there cannot be any parking spaces required. And if it's outside of that half-mile parameter, only one parking space can be required. Towns cannot limit the number of ADUs allowed in the zoning district. And they cannot require that ADUs be only attached or detached. Towns cannot require that ADUs have their own separate or independent utilities. So if there's the ability to hook into an existing system, whether it's a septic or connection to city or sewer line, they need to be able to do that. That's not to say that you can't establish your own utility connection, it just can't be required by the town. All ADUs have to, comply with Title V requirements. For septic, that includes, siting, permitting, whether you want to expand or, fits it. But if you have room on your existing septic, so you say you have a 5-bedroom, you only have 4 bedrooms in the house, you have that ability to put a 1-bedroom ADU on using your existing septic. And then further, municipalities can't be more restrictive in their utility connections than for a single family dwelling. Towns can go further, on Title V requirements for single families, but they can't only go further for ADUs. So this is going to have to be, and importantly through all of these regulations, whatever you regulate for a single family is as far as you can go with regulating accessory dwelling unit. This next slide is very wordy. It's a little blurry. I encourage everyone to take a picture. I'm assuming we can send this around afterwards if people want it.
Yep.
But these are all the key regulations that people should know about this. And that's why I threw it in here. But a few of kind of the more important ones, I highlighted dimensional setbacks. They cannot be more restrictive than single family zoning. So, if a house can be, within 25 feet from the front yard, so can an ADU. The state has encouraged towns to allow ADUs to be, more permissive than single-family zoning requirements for setbacks. But if, say, you have a 2.5-story max on your houses, an ADU can be 2.5 stories. So it's whatever is for the single-family zoning is also for the ADU. I didn't highlight it, but short-term rentals is one of the things that can be regulated. So towns can prevent ADUs from being used as short-term rentals. That's just something to decide ahead of time. The town should have a town-wide ordinance on short-term rentals, not just on ADUs, but that is one thing that they can regulate. Municipalities cannot require extra impact studies or extra fees, extra things, beyond single-family zoning for just ADUs, so that you can't just have a fee for developing an ADU. It has to be the same as what you would do for a single family. And then, like I said, pre-existing non-conforming structures can't be barred from being used just solely because they don't, fit within the modern day zoning. A lot of garages have different setback requirements than single family, and a lot of lots, especially towns like this region, older lots don't fit even modern day zoning requirements. So towns can't just limit ADUs to saying, well, if it doesn't fit our modern day, if a house can be there, an ADU should be able to be there. So closing out, why build an ADU? In the first place, many of the reasons: they provide rental income to property owners, they enable options for older adults, long-term residents that may need to downsize or relocate, can kind of have more options to stay in the communities they love and know. It adds smaller rental units to the market, and then it increases much more affordable options, a bit more diverse, and then we really want to take use of be smart and use our compact lots and whatnot to kind of help grow our housing stock as we kind of look to address the housing shortage that we have here in the state. And that is it for me.
So again, I'm Hannah Bowen. I am a city councilor at large here in Beverly, and wanted to just share a little bit about the process we went through in doing city zoning for accessory dwelling units, and how that sort of played out at the state level differently, and what the trade-offs were that we were looking at, because I think it may also help you think through where ADUs work best, what needs to be managed, what neighbors might think, what some of the objections have been along the way, and how those have been addressed. So we tackled this issue at a city level because there is this interplay between state law and city and town zoning, and municipalities hold tight to our right to control zoning, and that has some strengths and that has some weaknesses, and it has certainly contributed to our housing crisis and the lack of keeping pace with how families and lifestyles are changing and our housing needs in this area. So as a community, Beverly had zoned previously for density in a transit-oriented development model. So the buildings along Rantoul Street are additional building of density downtown over the last 10 plus years. That's one strategy for addressing the housing crisis. And in Beverly, that has meant having a thriving downtown, sort of a revival of our main streets economy, more housing units, and also typically higher price rentals in those buildings, complaints about traffic downtown and parking. And so in looking at what are the other ways we can address the housing crisis, we looked at accessory dwelling units as something that helps address the kind of missing layer of more affordable, smaller units in a wider range of neighborhoods. So accessory dwelling units let you sort of infill development without changing the character of a neighborhood. You don't notice the increased density as much. And it's really about sort of adapting neighborhoods we have to the changes that are already underway and just how people are living. So when we were thinking through the trade-offs, I was continually trying to remind people, to not just have the knee-jerk reaction to, oh, we're gonna cram more density into a neighborhood that won't fit it, and really think through, like, what will this look like? How will it look different from what's there now? How will it better meet our needs? So I wanna run through what some of those trade-offs were and where we landed on them, and how now having state law open up this set of possibilities statewide changes how we play it out here in Beverly, but also opens up more opportunities. So some of the things that we talked about. So first, a lot of people had concerns about changing the neighborhood feel and sort of going from single family homes to a multi-family neighborhood. And people had a lot of ideas about what that would mean. So in writing our ordinance locally, we built in things like the accessory dwelling unit needing to match the style of the primary dwelling. Whatever our zoning is for single family homes applies to accessory dwelling units. Now at the state level, there's encouragement for communities to accept really anything that could fit in your existing zoning as an ADU, and that's great because it preserves that sort of neighborhood feel. And it helps those neighborhoods adapt. So what might have been built as a single family home for a larger family when people were having more children and suburbs were designed for a certain type of lifestyle, now we have different transit opportunities, we have more remote work careers, we have different flexible schedules for different types of careers, we have smaller family sizes, and so we need the same neighborhood to accommodate what might have been 8 people who were all related, now being a couple of families living on the same lot. So we talked a lot about things like parking. And initially people think, oh, another housing unit, we're gonna have 3 more cars, everything's gonna be out on the street, and that's not typically the case. We landed on requiring 1 parking space with ADUs. Now that won't be, with the state law superseding, that won't be true for homes that are close to transit in Beverly. It will still be true for homes that are further from transit in Beverly. But we had a whole debate about whether we could require that spot not be a tandem spot, and had a whole discussion about, when you have a family that owns 2 or 3 cars in a single driveway, how is that any different from, 2 units that each own a car and share a driveway? And so being able to think through, like, how is this really gonna play out in reality? And just because 2 families and 2 housing units on the same lot might not be related, doesn't mean that their cars take up any more space. So we worked through sort of the realities of who's gonna actually live in an accessory dwelling unit in a single family neighborhood. We talked a lot about owner occupancy. In our ordinance, we did require owner occupancy in one of the 2 units. That now is superseded by state law. The reason we did that was to prioritize residential use and ownership, and discourage just investment properties in single family neighborhoods that might start to price people out, and really wanting that sort of local ownership and building home ownership opportunities and the opportunity for people to hold on to their homes. So that is a trade-off that we thought about. And if you're thinking about sort of who is going to include an ADU, someone who wants to help cover the costs of maintaining their home might be a good candidate as an owner occupant and a small landlord. So someone who's gonna be on site renting to just one person. we talked about short-term rentals quite a bit. And so in Beverly, we had a policy not allowing short-term rentals like Airbnbs, except under certain very small circumstances. But in creating the accessory dwelling unit ordinance, realized that that language needed to be tightened up quite a bit to make it really clear what those circumstances were, and that you would essentially have to register as a bed and breakfast rather than just a short-term rental. So that applies across the board. It applies to your whole house or an ADU, and that will stay the same under the state law because we have that policy citywide and we tightened up that language. Whether it's an ADU or it's a whole house, the same policy applies. The reason that comes up a lot is because people are concerned about housing units that are prioritizing sort of commercial rentals, tourism, things like that, over long-term residential needs. And in a housing crisis, we wanted to prioritize all housing units being available for residents. I think one other sort of principle that we landed on that really comes through in the state level regulations as well is this idea that whatever could be done in a particular space under single family zoning should be able to adapt to the kinds of housing units that we want, these smaller housing units in larger spaces. And so we also, spent a lot of time debating, if you're on a non-conforming lot, can you squeeze in an ADU? And what it came down to is if you could squeeze in a garage under our zoning to house your vehicle, or you could squeeze in a shed under our zoning to house your tools, you should be able to squeeze in a home for someone in that same space under those same rules. Some of how we're seeing ADUs play out in Beverly. So when we were having this debate, it was introduced in 2022, passed in 2023, and now has been in effect for over a year. And we've seen, I think, over 15 ADUs so far. The number might even be ticking up further. It's sort of month by month, there's more. And there are a variety. So as it was introduced, I was getting calls from people saying, how fast is this gonna go? Because my daughter is about to have her first child and we really wanna get the unit up and running so that they can move home and there's no place else for them in Beverly. What are we gonna do? So that sort of, families trying to build an intergenerational living space that they have separate living spaces. They're using the equity they've built in their home, they're protecting that, but they're creating separate living spaces for a now extended family and multi-generational living. That's been one of the number one uses. And that was already in some ways permitted in Beverly if you had a family tie. But as soon as that person moved out, you had to rip out the kitchen and convert it back. So now under our policy and under the state law that now applies everywhere, even if you built an ADU for a family member, you would know that if they moved out, if things changed, that would be rentable to anyone. We've also seen, I heard from a lot of advocates while we were going through the process who were looking for more affordable rental opportunities, like a teacher in Beverly unable to afford the rents in some of the newer builds where new construction is inherently costly, and looking for someplace walkable to a neighborhood school. And so some of the neighborhoods that they wanted to look in don't really have rental opportunities as much. Under this new policy, someone with extra space on their lot can offer that rental and is likely, and we'll hear some of the costs of building and what makes it feasible to get a unit up and running, but can typically do that a lot more affordably. You may also we have a lot of people who are looking to downsize and can't find a place that they can move to, even if they sold their larger home, what they're gonna buy into, the interest rates at which they're gonna buy, they're gonna get less space for really no benefit. They'll have no savings left. So people are looking around thinking, how can I make this work? And by converting an ADU and moving into it, they get less maintenance for themselves, they get an income stream, they may get a new neighbor who is, yes, a tenant, but also able to help with some of the property maintenance. So it's a different type of landlord-tenant relationship in that kind of neighborhood setting. And so we're hearing from a lot of families who are looking for that kind of, okay, I'll stay on the property, I'll be downsizing, I'll make the finances work, and under more stable policies where we have this predictability, we know what's happening statewide, we'll know that when it's time to sell, this property is going to be worth more. So I might end with those examples. I think the other thing I've thought a lot about this policy. We adopted it locally because it was time. There were some, I think, fear that we would get a lot of pushback if it was introduced from people who just didn't want to see any further building, and didn't really see that. Once it was introduced and we could talk through, okay, this is the size we're talking about. We're talking about maintaining design standards. We're talking about making affordable rental units and income for homeowners who need it. A lot of the resistance sort of faded away once we started talking specifics. And the specific things that needed to be managed, like parking, we've found ways to work through, and the individuals actually building the units are finding ways to work through with their neighbors. So, seeing this then play out at a state level, I think it's a benefit to Beverly to have been a little bit ahead of the curve, because we've already gotten some ADUs built that were needed. There was definitely pent-up demand for that, and we've seen them happen. But it also means that we'll see the benefit of more housing units across the state, which should help with affordability further. So that's what I got.
So, a lot of moving pieces here, that's for sure. From my perspective, I'm hoping it might make my life a little easier down the road, as I've had to play the bad guy an awful lot, inspecting these homes and finding, the basement, kitchen and the son living down there, and with the stove that looks like Uncle Frank put it in, and it's been there forever, Mike. It's like, well, yeah, it's been there forever, and it's not a grandfathered situation. If it's a sale, I really don't have to worry about it, because the fire department goes in and they check it. But even people refinancing or selling between family members, I always check the legality of these units, and 90% of them just were put in at some time and just been there forever. And I always tell people, they don't see what the big deal is, but I'm like, if you guys have a fire down there, and this isn't on record that there's a kitchen there, or it's hooked up to the 220, I'm like, your insurance company's not going to pay for you. I mean, is it worth that much to get a few hundred extra bucks? Whatever you get for rent, or I guess why I'm here is, you guys have to, at some point, you're going to come across to do a CMA. You're going to have to decide it. Now you got a accessory unit. And I'm like, all right, how much? It cost us $250,000 to put in. Yeah, same thing. Like a pool, $100,000 put in, you might be getting 20% back on that. There's not enough data yet, because it's just starting out, and AD units are here and there. They're definitely out there, in-laws, AD units. But in terms of what you guys probably are looking for me is, all right, how do I figure that into my CMA? What I've done up to this point is, and it's funny because some lenders have me look at it differently. Some lenders just want me to do a lump sum adjustment. Okay, it's got a legal, ADU in-law apartment off the back, meets all the requirements, the city has it, and just give us a lump sum adjustment on the appraisal. Chase, they want it broken down, they want it included in, depending on who you deal with. Up until this point, I'm hoping this will conform, not only from an appraisal standpoint, but from a lending standpoint, kind of all be on the same page. Typically, we know it's going to add a lot of value, again, depending on the construction, and how big it is, and quality. But in terms of you guys trying to figure out what it's adding, it'll get easier, I guess, as it goes along, as more of them pop up, and then you can see the sales. Same exact houses, in similar neighborhoods, even going back 6 months, a year, and how much more, these people got for their homes. It's called match pairs. I do it now, but I'll even go back 3 or 4 years to try to isolate a certain you know, like solar panels, you know, what is this amenity worth? This is a big amenity, this is, you know, like I said, it could be a couple hundred, $200,000-$300,000 to put it on now. Are you gonna adjust that much for that in terms of when you do your CMAs? Probably not, you know, but like I said, the data right now isn't, because they're so sparse, and trying to line up two houses with one, you know, exact house, one without an ADU and the other with it, you know, similar neighborhoods, and it's a red herring. You might find one in a different city and from a different time frame.
Mike, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Have you heard, are they gonna, like, if an ADU is approved, is the town gonna do some sort of an automatic assessment adjustment to the property?
I wouldn't
Yes.
know, yeah.
I call them TV's doing.
PV says yes?
Yeah. That'll just be your assessment, but that, we know that doesn't have anything to do with like, all right, how much more can I get
No,
for my house, you know? And
No,
it's
no,
like, you know,
yeah.
your assessment might go up $75,000, but that was a $200,000, you know, ADU that we put on. I'm like, how much can we expect to realize, you know, for that gain? And that's why I'm saying it's kind of early in the game for me as an appraiser. We know it's more desirable, we know it's worth more money in terms of how, you know, how much per, like, 80%, so it costs us $200,000, there's a 70% of it. That's gonna come over time in terms of when we have more and more of these and we can see exactly how much, you know, similar houses are selling for, one with the ADU and one without. It's just gonna be experience. And now there's so many illegal ones that are getting fished out, you know, and people converting, you know, that's the reason why multifamilies have jumped so high, is because people needed these extra units. And we're converting the condos, so many got converted to condos that made that pool of rental units, people making big bucks on the conversion. Now there's less of them, so supply and demand, that's driving the prices up. But in terms of telling you, like, all right, how much should I adjust for this, Mike? It's an 800 square foot ADU. The comps in the neighborhood are telling me $750, but I got an ADU. We know
It's a
it's,
ballpark.
yeah, you know, and it's just, until there's more data, until there's more, you know, comps that you can look around and say, okay, see that one over there, you know, we saw that one was 150,000 more. You can kind of judge it a lot better.
Interior design, architecture, and construction as well. If you see this little brochure over here, it shows somewhat a picture of a house and something that looks like it's kind of attached to the house. So that's an example of one ADU that at that time was not an ADU, wasn't called ADU yet, but it was created as an in-law apartment. So let me just tell you a little bit of how the process is. So if somebody calls and asks me, okay, I have this property, is this going to qualify to have the dwelling unit on it? I always look at the site first, and I ask for a survey because I need to know, all the rules apply the same way. So basically I need to know the size of the lot. I need to know if it's going to fit on the lot and how. What is going to be the ratios of open space and maximum coverage, the footprint and things like that, or the maximum height. So all of these things are very important. I do have like those little QR codes here that I recorded a couple of like videos about these things and also wrote a couple of blogs about it if you wanted to take a look at them. Maybe there will be some information that you could benefit from. But I do want to say that there are ADUs that are in the basements. There are ADUs that could be in the attic. You could utilize a portion of your house that you already have, or you can add on, or you can just separate it all the way in the backyard somewhere so it's hidden away. All kinds of questions come up when people call because there is a lot of traction towards this. There is a lot of interest and people are a little scared to do it because they don't know the rules. So we work very closely with the city and we always ask our questions and things are changing and we always have to take your project and literally go with your project and ask the same questions we just asked a week ago because maybe there's some change. So we always communicate really well with the building department. People would ask me like, what fits into 900 square foot space, right? Because that's a big question. So first of all, like you have a main principal building and it's 1,200 square feet, right? And you have a basement that's not finished, but can you finish the basement? So these kinds of questions Like maybe you can finish the basement if it has a height of 7 foot or more, and then that qualifies to be more percentage of the whole principal building. And then afterwards, you can add the appropriate amount that you want, like 900 square feet, which is the maximum, correct? So what fits in there? So a kitchen, a living room, a dining room, 2 bedrooms, a bathroom and a half, or 2 sometimes. And that actually is a pretty good size. I think it would be comfortable to probably, I would say about 4 people max, like comfortable, like an apartment, you know, if you think about like an apartment, 2-bedroom apartment, so pretty much like that. I do have to say there's lots of things if it comes to basements, because you need egress for each bedroom. Yes, you do need smokes, and you also need to make sure that you have proper egress. So you have to be able to get out of the building. So it's kind of like treated as here's your principal building, here's the dwelling unit. All of a sudden it's treated like a multifamily because the same rules apply. So basically you have to have your fire protection on the walls, you have to have 5/8 of an inch high backs, sheetrock doubled up, so there's a fire protection. There's additional things like means of egress, like you can go into the space, but you have to be able to get out somewhere else. So if you have any questions, please ask if you have anything about that, but that will be probably what I wanted to kind of summarize really quickly because there's a lot.
I'm Lee from Archer Insurance here in Beverly. So it was interesting. I thought I knew everything I needed to about how to answer these questions and give this presentation. And I'm lucky that I doubted myself a little because I called all my underwriters and I did some research for tonight. And one thing that's sort of similar here is that there are a lot of we're learning as we go and case by case. I called prominent insurance companies, Andover, Hanover, Mopfre, and others. And in 2 out of 3 of those, my underwriters, who I think know everything about everything, one said, I have never been asked this question. Mm-hmm. One said, I just got a memo that we needed to have a workshop on. So this is definitely a new frontier. One, she knew everything. I should have brought her. So one theme that was true to my instincts initially is first and foremost, whether it's your grandmother in your, closet or your son in the garage, the minute you create a second living unit, kitchen is definitely a trigger. You just need to inform your insurance company. Forget all the other restrictions. If there are 2 separate occupants in the home and it is rated as a single, in that basement, 21-year-old burns the place down, it is a problem because they will immediately say, well, we didn't know there was 2 of you living there in another unit. So first and foremost, ADU conforming or not, just inform. We have multiple, probably not legal, second units on Marge, upstairs, there's a kitchen that we don't get into the code. We just want to know that there's 2 families, 2 occupants. All right? So first and foremost, just inform your agent and then deal with what comes from it. Because if you don't, forget the 700 square foot ADU. Your entire 2,200 square foot house, if that disappears in an F word, well, you have nothing now because the insurance is not going to pay. So they all approached it once we got into the weeds differently. The Andover companies said that we will not allow for us to add on your house as coverage A as your building, and then your garage is your other structure. Your ADU, if it's separate, will be your other structure. The Andover companies, I thought, will just bump up coverage B, other structures. My $50,000 garage is now $150,000, $200,000, whatever it might be. They actually disagree with that. They want that separate building to actually be written separately, okay, if it is an investment unit, okay? So literally you have your homeowners and you convert the garage. Now we write that garage under what's called, who here knows what a dwelling fire is? That's a landlord-owned, tenant-occupied house. It's called dwelling fire. It's actually really an ominous word for an insurance product, okay? Dwelling fire, what's that mean? Mopfre said, we'll do ADUs. We don't need a separate policy. We will just increase coverage B like I thought. But they said only for family members. No investment for outside strangers. okay? Hanover said that we will bump up coverage A and we don't care who's living there. They all said something different. Go ahead,
Did it
Gil.
matter if it was attached or detached?
The context of this is more of the detached. My initial opening was the minute you have somebody moving in, sharing in the cost, just disclose that we've got a separate occupant. And not your kid. That's a bad example. Your kid's always welcome in the basement.
Maybe not all.
I think the things you need to think about as you do this are value. You know, if you are adding a kitchen or converting a garage completely, have a discussion with your agent so that your house is probably valued. You know, even if you can tuck it into an existing garage and you don't add $1, your house is probably underinsured now after what happened with inflation anyway. This is the time to call your agent, okay? I think I came away from this saying, wow, I've never felt in an area where robots can answer almost every question you'd ever ask me, I never felt more valued. Because I actually don't think you can navigate this without calling your independent agent, okay? No. Also, if you, short-term rental, it seems like that's sort of on the outskirts right now. I might be able to rent my garage to Uncle Wilbur, but I can't put it on Airbnb without disclosing it, okay? Because insurance companies have very limited, if any at all, appetites for short-term rentals. The standard insurance companies, then you go to the surplus lines, okay? So, another thing, if you are renting your garage now, make sure that your policy affords you rental income. You would not have put that dude back there if you could afford your bills without him or weren't looking to get that money, right? So now, if something happens to the ADU and they can't occupy it safely, well, they're not paying rent, and you just refied to put your addition up top and by the big screen, and now you can't make that additional payment, which could be adjusting because the ADU is now no longer inhabitable due to claims. So, you know, you want to talk about, are you furnishing it? You know, if you're furnishing it for them, well, now you got to bump up your coverage for furnishings and not just the dwellings. So let's end on this. Call your agent, and if you don't have one, call me.
Thank you for having me. I'm a septic professional, so this part of it is all new. Been dealing with the same regulations for the 25 years I've been doing it. But now we're into uncharted territory. We've come down with some state law. All the local municipalities are scrambling to adopt and adapt to all these new regulations. From my perspective, just over the past year or so, people are starting to explore this. So at the beginning of this process, if you have a septic system, the most important thing to do is explore what you have for a septic system. Is it newer? Is it documented at all? You want to hire probably somebody like myself or a septic designer, unless you are capable of doing it yourself, to go and research the information on the septic. The most important thing is how many bedrooms that septic is designed to handle. If you have a 4-bedroom house and you have a 4-bedroom septic, you're more than likely going to have to upgrade that septic system in order to accommodate the additional flow. If you don't have a septic system at all, it won't be a consideration. It'll just be a matter of how you're going to run your sewer line from either your attached or detached additional unit. So that's where you want to begin. I handed out a document that's on the table there. Just kind of an overview of, I put down items for consideration and assistance needed. So the folks that I listed and the assistance needed are all people that can help you through this process. As far as, the information you're looking for is number of bedrooms, that you may go to a research. If someone's been in the home a while, there's been never a Title V done, you may go to the Board of Health. There may be no information on the septic at all, none. So in that case, they're probably gonna say the septic's good for whatever you have now, but if you're gonna add, you're gonna have to add to your septic. That's gonna trigger perk testing, design engineer, submitting plans for approval, all that process, which is somewhat timely, probably months in that ballpark. All these towns, like I said, are interpreting different. I've done some research on projects that I've had recently in West Newbury. They're currently allowing variances to what you have. As long as your system is documented, they'll allow you variances to adjust that system to accommodate the additional flow. Ipswich, for instance, is considering every one of these a new construction. They may run into some legality at the state level on that, but right now, their document on their website says every one of these is a new construction. No variances, no nothing. Essex says if you have a well, you have to drill an additional well for an additional unit, because if you can't feed off of, so if you take away anything from my perspective, every lot's gonna be different, every town's gonna be different, so get the research done at the beginning before you commit a lot of resources to it, because it may be either cost prohibitive or not possible if there's not enough room on the site for another building and a septic and a reserve area. Some of them may accommodate it just fine. The instance in West Newbury, it was a 4-bedroom house that currently only had 3 in it, so they allowed them to reconfigure and then show that they were just adding the 1 additional bedroom and a detached unit, how the plumbing connections were gonna be made and such. We did have to change the septic tank, because in the regulations for Title V, if you have multiple dwellings, you have to have a multiple compartment septic tank. So most septic tanks for a single family home are 1 compartment. So in this case, we had to change the tank from a 1 compartment to a 2 compartment. That cost was approximately $8,000. So to change out just the septic tank in that case. Some of the other things that are gonna be like space, are there any deed restrictions on the house? So some homes have actual deed restrictions recorded at the registry of deeds that says this septic and this home are restricted to 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms. So the legality of that will have to be worked through. And again, local restrictions. So the difference, every town is interpreting this and enforcing it differently right now. I think as this plays out, there's gonna be challenges made to these towns. So they put regulations out there to get this process going. But I think as you see this go through, some people are gonna challenge these towns on these regulations just because they're not all the same and they need to comply with the state law. So the local board of health is gonna help you with the initial planning, permitting, and inspections. A septic designer will be in the planning process, permitting and design if you need it. So if you have to make alterations to your septic, the board of health is more than likely gonna make you get a plan done. Somebody like myself, I am an installer and inspector. Most towns, from what I've seen, are requiring a Title V at the beginning of this process if you have a septic. So I have a bunch of them right now. People are calling, I wanna do an ADU, I have to do a Title V. So they're not per se selling, but they're making them do a Title V to get a base point, a starting point on that septic. So inside of that document, the design info, the map, and all this stuff will be created. You wanna check with the building inspector at the beginning of all this process. They'll be able to supply the documentation on that end. The Conservation Commission is a big one, so if you're expanding where you think you're gonna expand and it's in a buffer zone, it may require filings, it may, that's a whole nother permitting process through them as long, if you're in their jurisdiction. The planning board as well is gonna control the regulations of the permitting. And then I put also on the local DPW and power utilities. So that's another consideration. If it's attached, it's a little easier than if it's detached, because if it's detached, where's the power coming from? Where's the water coming from? Is the water line to the main house big enough to supply more than 1 dwelling? Some older homes have 1/2 or 3/4 water lines going in them. Is that gonna be enough to supply more than 1 operating unit as far as laundry, kitchen, showers? So if the water line may not be big enough, now you're upgrading the service into the home, or you're adding additional service for that additional unit, which is opening up the street, and it becomes costly. I generated this to kind of give talking points and give you an idea of a starting point to get, but every home in different towns is going to be different. So engage somebody or do your research yourself and figure out if your home is gonna be eligible to have one of these. I'm available, I work mainly north of here. I'm up in the Groveland, Georgetown, West Newbury, Boxford area mainly, but I do kind of dabble around the edges. I do know some of you have met before through do my work. So, thank you for having me.
Thanks, Andrew, thanks.
Hi everybody, so my name is Ray Chenard, I'm with Langer's End Mortgage here in Beverly. I also live here in Beverly, and I get the fun part. I get to give you the money to do all this. So, from my perspective, as they've all said, this is fairly new. It's all evolving. Where to get the money from? I think Plan A would be wealthy relative. That's going to be. Mom and Dad want to move in, and they have got the cash to pay for it. That's Plan A. Plan B, and what we're talking to probably 95% of the people that are starting to think about this is probably doing an equity line. Thankfully, when this is all happening right now, our home values are up. People have a lot of equity. I think that's going to be the easiest way for people to pay for these things. But as you can see, and the reason I'm going last is that, think about yourselves if you're going to do this. You kind of have to go through a lot of different phases before you even get to me. You have to talk to the city or town first and say, can we even do this? Oh, great, we can do this. Okay, we're going to talk to a builder and see what is this all going to cost. So I typically come in at that point where people have a rough idea of what this is going to cost, and we talk about maybe doing an equity line. The reason you would do that as an equity line is that you're free to do whatever you need to do. It's no different than if you wanted to write a check against your equity line to put on a roof or put in a pool. You can just do that. You don't have to worry about the lender looking into all sorts of permits and construction and checking on everything. So that's by far, that's game plan A, is to do an equity line, because you're free to just kind of pay as you go. And I would always tell people, if they're starting from scratch, if they get their number, it's like any construction project, you want to leave a little bit of overage. With an equity line, you're only going to pay on what you use. So if you get a quote for this is going to cost $125,000, do the equity line for $150 or $160, just so you can leave yourself that buffer. Plan C, I think, would be if you needed to do a full construction loan. So if you get all the quotes from the contractors and you find out you have to do all the septic work and you've got to put in a new well and this and that, and now you don't have enough equity to do this and you have to do it as part of a construction loan, you can still do that, but just know that the bank or the lender is going to be checking in along the way. They're going to give you a series of draws. So if this thing is going to cost $200,000 to do the whole thing, the lender might say, we need to see all the plans, permits, specs. We're going to give you $50,000 to start all of this. And then once that $50,000 is all used up and everything is done with that phase, we're going to go back, we're going to check it out, make sure it was all done up to code, and you did everything you said you were going to do, and then we're going to give you your next check for $50,000. So it's sort of like you got to kind of keep going back to mom and dad to say, okay, we finished, we need more money now. It's a lot more work for the homeowner. So if people have the equity to do it, I would certainly say an equity line is the easiest way to go. You just have more control over the whole project. So that's 95% of the question that we get on it right now. People are asking, hey, if I can do this, how am I going to pay for it? I think going forward, it's sort of like Mike said, now when these are more of the norm, and we get 2, 3, 4 years down the road, and we start seeing sales that have ADUs, that's where the appraiser is going to be really important. How much value are they giving to that ADU? For us, really not much different. We're going to look at that accessory dwelling unit and say, well, what's the market rent that somebody could charge on that? And we're going to factor that into what the person is using to qualify for the mortgage. So on our end of things, it really shouldn't be terribly different than if somebody's buying a 2-family or a 3-family. We're going to look at the market rent to help them qualify for the mortgage. But I think the tough job is going to be for the real estate agents and the appraisers to say, we have this 900 square foot dwelling, what's the value on it? That's going to be the tricky part.
All right, in closing, I just want you to reach out to your realtor if you have any questions about the process, or reach out to our fabulous panelists. You have pamphlets that have a QR code to download the ADU zoning guidelines for Essex County. And I think that's about it, but I just want to take the time to thank our sponsor, Lendazan, again, for allowing us and our Strategic Alliance Committee for organizing it. So thank you all for coming.